Okay, hey everybody. In this video, we're going to look at getting a single beer via a get ID, beer get by ID API. So we actually mentioned this in the first video where we're going to do beer. Where is it? Beer get ID. I don't like this name. We might say get by ID instead, just to make it more clear what it actually does. And that's what we're going to implement is the get beer by ID. There is an API for that. It's just beers / and then the ID. For example, it gives us a single beer. So that's what we're going to implement today. Very simple. It's just going to be very similar to the get, except it's going to be one parameter. So nice and simple. So let's go ahead and add a procedure. I'm going to do it below my beers get. And let's do this. Identical procedure. Beer get by ID. Of course, export. Oh, I'm not typing today. And end proc. And for this, we just want one parameter. We honestly just want an ID for a beer. So let's say pi beer get by ID, and it's going to return a pointer. It's going to return a beer object. And of course, we want the beer ID. That will be an int5 in this case. We'll make it a const. That's pretty much the majority of the work here. Now, we are also going to have a variable to, for the URL, which in the other case was a varying length character 128. Nice and short, I suppose. We need a pointer variable to return the JSON for. And and of course we need a response variable, which I'm just going to copy from up here. So very similar. And actually fairly similar. We can copy a lot of the code from the get API in general, because of course it's just beers and then plus the ID. So we can just say p. We can just turn the p beer ID into a character and then append it onto the URL. It's very simple. And then we need to call it and return the object. So we're just going to copy this piece of code and paste it in down here. And that's it. That really is it. Not a lot of work to do a get by ID. Let's just copy this here and also put it into our header file. So beer get by ID, and I think if we pass in an ID that doesn't exist, it gives us a 404, which is awesome. So that means we can use our beer successful to find out, whether it actually was successful or not. And of course, let's just change this to PR and add our ext proc on there. Save that. Excellent. So from here, let's go ahead and compile our service program. And let's go ahead and update the service program as well. Next, let's go ahead and create a new example. Let's call it example2.rpgle. Oh, we already have example2. Never mind. Example3.rpgle. There we go. And I'm going to copy most of the stuff from example1 here. Paste it into example3, except instead of p-page, we're going to say p-beer ID, and that will be, let's say, character 3. And what else should we do here? We don't need the page number. We don't need data. We do need current beer, and we don't need. We'll keep name. We might use it. We don't need an index, and we don't need a count. We don't need the page number. Okay, so where we have data equals beers get, what we're actually going to do is say, let's get rid of the majority of this. We don't actually need it. What we're going to say is current beer equals beer get by ID, and it takes a single parameter, which of course is the ID, beer ID, int5. And that's going to be beer ID equals percent int p beer ID. And I believe we could actually use an integer as a parameter. In fact, let me just double check that. rpgle parameter int. Let me just, I believe we can use an int 10. 10a. This is not a useful page. passing parameters from the command line. Well, just tell me, I just want to use the int type. Okay. In fact, let's just try it. We have a debugger, right? So let's say BID is int 10, and then we can really save the effort here and just pass it in. So we don't even need that. We could just say p beer ID, like so. And then, of course, that will actually make the call, and then we're going to check if it was successful. And if it is, then we can display information about the current beer. So let's say name equals beer get name, and then we'll pass in the current beer. And let's just display the name. Fairly simple. And then, of course, if it's in error, let's display no such beer. Just, you know, in case it probably is an error like that, just to be real safe. Let's just go ahead and save that. And we could try and compile it also. Data is not defined. Well, that's because we're not using data, we're using current beer. Okay. Oh, because we also renamed it example 3. There we go. Let's go ahead and compile that. And we should be good to go. Love it. Love it. So, my session timed out. Lucky me. Let's go ahead and sign in here. Make this a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and add Punk API to my library list and start debug example 3. And let's put a breakpoint on our current beer. So then we can do call example 3. And let's just try 1. 0. Okay, so int 10 is obviously not the correct type. 0 will fail, I believe. Or maybe there is a beer from 0. Disk job log. No such beer. Okay, 400. What is that error? Let's have a look. Beers 0. Yeah, beer ID must be a number and greater than 0. Fairly straightforward. So maybe it's an int 5. I'm not sure. This is a lot of work. Arbitrarily integer. You just have to know the int type. Why is this so much work? Okay. 10i, that's what we have. This is Java and RPG comparisons. Int 5. Okay, let's try that. Oh, maybe, oh wait, it's probably because we are passing it from the command line, so we may as well, if it was a CL, this would be different, but it's not a CL, so compile that again. And let's start debug, example 3. Cool. And let's pass in 1. No, okay, I'm going to change it back to a character. I don't want to spend most of this video figuring out why that isn't doing it, so we'll just change it to a character 3, and then we'll say beer ID equals percent character, percent int, sorry, beer ID. And we're not using that anymore, we're using beer ID. Okay, so we've compiled. Now I'm not even going to debug it this time. Okay, we're getting there slowly. Oh, because that one's obvious. Disk job log. Display blank. So we may actually have to look at the JSON, because oh, you know why? Because it still returns. If we pass in 1, it still returns an array. Okay, that's fine. So what we're going to do instead is say, while we do pass the JSON, what we actually want to do is, how do we do this? Because I don't want to cause any, what we'll have to do is say, this is fairly simple. Let's rename current beer to, let's call it data again, and then actually have a one called current beer, where, you know, that will be there. And then we can say current beer equals beers dot at 1 or 0. I think beers at is the right API. We call that, compile it. Parameter 1 is not valid as parameter is passed by reference. Why would I make an API that passes by reference? Oh, because we just need to pass in data. That's why. So let's compile that. Okay, excellent. So let's end debug. And let's call it. Let's have a look at the job log here. DSP. Display buzz. There it is. So now if we call it with, let's say, 2. Okay, there's number 2. Now let's also try a different number. Let's try 192, where we get Punk IPA 2007-2010. So let's try that too. Oh, why do I keep pressing end? So let's try 192. All right, awesome. Awesome, that's really cool. So now we have a way to fetch a beer by an ID, or also call it by, or search. You know, we can do paging or by ID now, which is really fun and cool. So that's pretty much this video. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Beer _ get by ID. I love it. Okay, and I don't really know what to do for the next video, but thank you very much for watching.